Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. I'm also the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and other platforms. I'm really excited to be recording this special video today, which features questions, I'm sure they're tough ones, submitted to me, they always are, by David Bain, publisher of Family Capital. Family Capital is an online publishing company based in the UK, dedicated to the global family office enterprise. Without further ado, let's begin with David's questions. From David Bain. Angelo, how has COVID-19 impacted single-family offices in terms of their adaptability? Well, I knew. That is a good question. And for sure, COVID-19 has been impactful. I want to be very clear in my message. So I wrote something that I think really and very quickly distills it. This summer, I spent significant virtual time with several of our largest member families and their heads of their family office, all of them multi-billion, one of them Forbes 20. And these were not just surveys, these were literally virtual Zoom and phone call meetings for multiple hours. And I've never seen such an extraordinary group of the best, I have to say, and this was a couple of months into COVID, but more relaxed, open, and engaged. We shared our thoughts on critical thinking and reinventing their family offices, from purpose to structuring to the importance of people, systems, which are processes, standards, and more. The opportunity and benefits of change was there before COVID-19, but many lacked the impetus to change, to adapt. COVID-19 forced this upon us. And although the virus has changed our lives and our interaction with others, it also forced us to do what we should have been doing all along: deeper critical thinking, stress testing, and adapting and reinventing our engagement with family, our business, and the family office. Again, maybe I was a little jaded talking to kind of the best of the best, and they all had to adapt. And basically a common theme with many of them was, I should have done some of these things years ago, from mitigating risk to preparing for Black Swan to doing deeper critical thinking to utilizing some more virtual services to using more technology more effectively and efficiently. And much of this, after a little bit of trial and error, has worked very well. Now, there are advantages to what we call the water cooler effect, to being all in the same location and bouncing off creative ideas. And I'm not going to deny that, and neither are the families. But I am saying they needed to adapt. There was no other option. And if you go by the option of needing a vaccine and 70% of the world getting it, then we could be a long way off. I mean, David's asking me these questions in early mid-October of 2020. So the best of the best, they take a step back, they realize some areas of weakness, and they look to always get better. In many cases, as I said, they reinvented themselves, and they're very happy so far in terms of with the outcomes. David Bain asks, what has your research shown as the core criteria that single-family offices must do to fulfill their obligations to the family? I've been saying this for a long time. It's even more important now. Solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. Now, of course, this varies from family to family, but in general, those seem to be three things that, solving problems and procuring positive future outcomes, that's going to be applicable all the time. An intergenerational necessity for many families is going to be critical, and for many single-family offices as well, to have a succession plan to sustain. And that's probably not the purpose of David's question, but that is going to be really, really important. To me, those are the big three. Family offices must be more rigorous, more institutional, and really, really high in quality, have high standards and expectations. And part of the challenge, and I'm just being honest, with much of the family office community is well-meaning, it's trustworthy, and those are very, very important things. If you don't have the family's trust, then you don't really have any sort of a sustainable family office. But I'd like to hope that going from good to great and great to exceptional and being of excellence in how effective you are and eventually becoming efficient. And this is kind of what's meant by being more institutional, having very, very talented, quality people that work together as a team, having the right systems, the right technology, and again, adapting, like I said, during COVID-19 times. I've always been a big fan from the intellectual and the psychological perspective of they must excel at critical thinking. It's generalizing to say this, but most of the families, of course, by the very nature of having a single family office, are already incredibly rich. They kind of want to stay that way. So look at it this way. They have the castle. They need a moat around that castle, and a modern moat that can not just address incoming by land, but from above, from virtual. And this is the importance of mitigating risk. It really comes down to wealth preservation. In many cases, generational wealth preservation for the families. And risks are everywhere. There's a huge number of them, a tiny selection. Viruses, which are now in our face with COVID-19 and perhaps likely to come at us from bad guys in the future. So this must be addressed. Viruses, cyber, intrafamily, which is where most destruction occurs, including things like divorce and intrafamily squabble. You know what a lot of this comes down to? Poor decision making, which goes back to critical thinking. So being careful relative to the decisions that you make as a family and a family office. Be proactive, mitigate risk, and prepare as much as possible for black swans. And one of David's questions is going to ask me to kind of prompt on that, and we're going to go somewhat into that. But let me get a little off target and talk a little bit about that now, because I think this is very important about the solving problems aspect that I mentioned. A family office could be correct 95% of the time, and that sounds great. But if the 5% of the time they're wrong, but they're wrong really big, meaning the consequences are horrifically negative, the family's not going to remember the 95% of the time you were right. Whereas if you're right 92% of the time, but the 8% of the time you're not, but you're containing the loss or the hit to be relatively negligible or relatively minor. Whereas if you're right almost all the time, but when you're wrong gets a massive hit to the family, the legacy, the capital, then that's just not going to work. So that's why you can't even go by statistics and probability. And it's important to measure. You can't improve what you can't measure. And many family offices are not quantifiable enough. But it is a marriage of quantifiable and qualitative. But it's very, very important to mitigate risk and to understand you could be right almost all the time. But if you're wrong on some really big things, that's just not going to work. David Bain asks, what's the most important determining factors in a successful single-family office? It's people, systems, and technology. People are, by a wide margin, number one. The quality of the people that you have in the position of leadership and the family office. Amazing how many of these families built astonishing businesses and had amazing liquidity. And their family office now represents effectively their legacy, their money, their new business. Technically, it's usually structured. We're not going to get too much into structuring today, but technically, often as a for-profit entity. Yet it does not get the same level of what I mentioned earlier, of rigor, of institutional standards. You need the right people. You need to treat them well, and they need to be compensated properly. On the better half of being compensated. And again, that's a deeper issue on compensation, which I don't think that was going to be one of David's questions. How do you find the people? Initially, many elders that had liquidity are going to choose someone they know and trust that's close to them. And that may not be a bad choice to initiate, although I would add, do they have the experience of structure, of building teams? And again, we'll probably save that one for a bit of a different time. But eventually, for the family office to be rigorous and institutional and held to a high quality, my experience is spend the money and bring in the right recruiters. Spend the money and bring in the right recruiters and recruit top talent. That's going to be incredibly important to make the family office successful. You need to treat it more institutional as opposed to just a sidebar business and mediocrity. If you're not going to build the family office correctly and do it correct and hold it to a high standard of excellence, then why do it at all? You're better off going likely in a different direction to begin with. So understanding, is that going to be an important impetus? And does the elders and the family members understand that an excellent single family office does things that nothing else can on privacy control and customization, of purchasing power, of unity in the family? And those are some things we're going to get to a little bit shortly. I go back again in terms of important determining factors and people being number one, of critical thinking, of problem solving. Systems are incredibly important as well. And now during COVID, many family offices were kind of caught off guard. What's your processes? What's your process to get to an outcome? Do you have clarity of goals from the family, which often changes a lot, but that's part of the course of being in the business. The communication with the family, standards, and policy and procedures. What happens if this person goes down? What happens if they leave? Is there cloud-based communication for assets and resources in the family? Systems are going to be incredibly important. And you also have the third one that I mentioned, technology. Today's successful family offices, especially now, they utilize all sorts of communication technologies and protocols, Slack and other communication vehicles, project management. You need to, again, you can't improve what you can't measure. You need to know who's doing what, and everyone needs to see that and be held accountable. CRM, aggregation and reporting software. I could go on. There's a tremendous amount of tech tools out there now, much of them relatively low cost. And, having diversity in the family office of people of different ages, where elders bring experience, a steady hand in trying times, and perhaps some younger people bring tech savviness and a different way of thinking at problems. These are the things that the best of the best single family offices do. David Bain asks, how can a single family office stay fresh and adaptive to threats? By stress testing, red cell team attacks and strategy, and playing out effectively what-if scenarios. Many family offices are too siloed. They're too insular. They don't have enough outside thinking, questioning what they're doing, challenging the status quo. experiences with more broadly global diverse issues that they could then bounce off ideas with the family office. They need, my opinion, they need outside resources to question the status quo and play out what sometimes we call in a consultants industry tabletop exercises, playing out a what if scenario. Suppose the principal in their late 70s gets COVID-19. Suppose they go on a ventilator really quickly, and the 33-year-old daughter is now executor and in charge of making decisions. What kind of dialogue have you had with her all along? How have you addressed estate planning documents? What happens if the principal dies? Where they die? There's so many different moving parts that you need to go through these kind of exercises. You need to challenge the assumptions that you're making and hold yourself to a higher standard. And if all you're doing is insular and not getting enough outside resources from, to some degree, even outside the community, you're not going to grow. It's important to have a beginner's mindset, to be adept at critical thinking. It's a little off topic, but I go back and I discuss this in my master classes. Let's look at games. You have chess, and chess is great. I love it too. But is it realistic in the real world? I'm here, you're there, everything we could see, and it has certain rules and standards of how a game starts and how pieces move. I still love it, but what I'm saying is in the real world and black swan events and stress testing things, it's probably a little more like poker or even Fisher chess. With Fisher chess, the core pieces on the back line are effectively randomly shuffled. So memorizing opening moves really is not going to work in something like Fisher chess. But let's go back to poker. Poker, you don't know exactly what the other parties have. There's an element of luck involved as well. And those are all things that are going to play out in the real world. And again, this comes down to people, the family, the board, the advisors, and the people in the family office and the people within the family. They could bounce, honest, critical feedback and communication and ideas with. And what coaches and mentors do they have? The best athletes in the world have individual coaches that challenge their assumptions, that question them, that give them honest feedback that sometimes others are almost afraid to give. I am a huge fan of tabletop exercises, playing out what-if scenarios, and strengthening the strategies that you're going to implement inside the family office by having others that are really smart. You're not always the smartest person in the room. You have to have the confidence to be able to bring in the right resources, and this makes you better and the family office better. And at the end of the day, you're of complete service to the family. You need to do the right thing that's going to be best for them. David Bain asked, Angelo, you're so well regarded, thank you, on your concepts and thoughts on wealth preservation, mitigating risk, black swan events. What are some of the takeaways for families and SFOs? I'm going to read an opening comment on this one too, then I'll jump into it. The rules that I wrote this, the rules of community and global engagement, as well as risk reward, are changing so rapidly during this crisis. The single family office may need to radically change to stay relevant to the needs of the family members and adapt to the evolving needs of the rising generation inside the family. Massive opportunity exists for those families and their single family offices that start the shift now versus waiting. Many single family offices will find that their current playbook doesn't work optimally anymore. That's broadly a little bit of how I want to initiate answering David's question. Other aspects of it, damn it, have a low profile. If you want to preserve wealth and hedge a little bit from prying eyes looking in from the outside, that's not such bad advice. Now, yeah, digging into great detail and giving away some of my secret sauce I kind of save for my membership and the families that I consult with, but I'll share some of it with you now. Many of you have heard me discuss in my videos, my masterclasses, my interviews, a little bit of old world measures of wealth preservation. And that's including buying offshore banks and creating, and again, usually offshore insurance companies. These days, given the regulatory challenges and more so for US or American citizens, lesser tax advantages, I would say it's not as attractive as it used to be. But that does not negate for some families in the US the opportunity of, again, intertwining the proper structures in their family office, which really should have been updated consistently, especially over the last couple of years. But for international families, and we do a lot of work with international families, it's more open than it is for a US citizen. And some of those old world buying strategically located banks and creating insurance companies offshore are very, very powerful strategies. Just going and buying a bank and having it dedicated just to you as the one uber rich family and your family office, effectively be a non-commercial, it's practically near impossible now to do that in the US and Europe. And Switzerland, forget about it. I don't care who you are. And we do a lot of things in Switzerland. That's just not going to happen. Maybe Estonia and some other countries. But for the most part, owning a bank is a very unique strategy. And still, for even American citizens, can be a powerful, not tax savings per se, although a little bit, but a powerful offshore wealth preservation strategy. And I think that Switzerland's incredible. There are other locations I would look at as well, but it's going to be a great location for a variety of perspectives. And by the way, if you're thinking, there's lots of banks available for sale in Switzerland. A lot of them are antiquated models, antiquated technology, and overpriced, and they have not been run correctly, so they're not profitable as they are. Imagine going in there, even though it's going to be more of a commercial enterprise, you and a team, and again, this is a commercial enterprise, and the right people and leadership and technologies might actually be a good business. In Switzerland specifically, no surprise, very tough regulatory and capital requirements. So the one family that's doing a lot of funding, don't think that's money you're going to get back when you're doing the capital requirements. Now, you could eventually sell your interest, and yes, that could get a little complicated in terms of the money coming back that you put in as capital. And again, that's not going to be the purpose of today's discussion for a variety of reasons, and some that I noted earlier. But there are advantages, including tax arbitrage and wealth preservation. I'm going to read to you, courtesy of the thoughts of Andrei Kolodovsky, 4 quick things that are advantageous potentially to certain individuals of great wealth owning banks. He states it can be used as a safe haven for your money. Since you control the risk policies of the bank, you can make it as safe as necessary. People who have to keep their capital in other banks always have to worry about bankruptcy risk. 2, you can bring cash flows of all your businesses you own or invested under one roof, allowing you to convert their operating cash flows into loanable money and better control of the business. A bank is an excellent glue as a conglomerate or holding. Very true. 3, banks can protect your capital from inflation by managing the difference between the duration of liabilities and assets. And I'm going to stop at 4. There's more. Banks give you access to the domestic and international payment systems, allowing you to move money around the world with ease, quickly, with more control and less cost. Now, again, this is not necessarily, depending on your citizenship, residence, or where the bank is, not necessarily going to be applicable for everyone. But what I am saying, and is the work that I do with my largest families, and often more than just being a member of my family office association, but consulting, these are the deep things they look at. how to set up the family office, the holding company. Should I have operations offshore? Should I have a private trust company? How does it integrate with holdings like a bank, like an insurance company? Insurance, and again, this is going to be more limited for US citizens, and it's gotten worse from the benefits of owning an insurance company. Now, it could be made more of a commercial enterprise that would allow more freedoms, but again, do you really necessarily want to be in the insurance business? Some families with various family members of varying interest could create what's called a captive insurer, which limits the amount of capital that could be put in. But if you have multiple family members, that could add up, but that is a bit on the IRS for American citizens listed transaction, kind of a top 10, I guess you could say, or 12 watch list. But these are things for the right families with the right consultative advisors are very, very powerful vehicles. And I'm sharing some of my most inner secrets about what the best of the best families do, especially around diversity and wealth preservation. I am a huge fan, and it probably has replaced some of the benefits of owning insurers, although there's, again, interest in that. I didn't even get into reinsurance companies. Those could be intriguing as well. But I am a big fan of private placement life insurance. The ability to invest in diverse alternative assets, to have it grow inside the protective, including tax protective wrapper of the insurance, to have it be possibly used as an estate planning vehicle, or possibly having access to the resources as first in, first out, and then wash loans of the assets growing in alternative assets, tax favored. Wow, I almost don't know where to begin, and I just went a little bit into it. It's a tremendously powerful vehicle, and practically all of my billion-dollar families that I've had a consultative relationship, after they understand it more, they almost always implement it. It's a very, very powerful vehicle. I've been an advocate over many years, and again, this is a deep, because this is really the heart of what we do in terms of building that moat around the castle of wealth preservation. So I get a little bit excited when I talk about this. I love this stuff 24/7. Creating an internal VC, investing in earlier stage companies. I have one family, I think they're a little crazy. Their plan, they're very early into it, and it'll probably adapt, is they created effectively an internal VC. They're engaging the next generation. They brought in 2 or 3 outside resources and are paying them handsomely, I guess you could say, with carry. And they're looking to invest 50 to 100,000 in hundreds, potentially up to 1,000 small, private, quote unquote, often tech-centric startups. They're looking for the big hits. Is one, I guess I think the average is 1 in 117 going to be a unicorn? It's hard, but they're in control of that process. And when they buy, when they sell, when they get out, etc., I am a huge fan broadly of the strategy of families considering that, and I'm one of the ones who recommended that to them. They just took it to another level. Other advanced strategies from a tax, wealth preservation, again, the moat around the castle, potentially, now this does make it a commercial enterprise, creating a commercial for-profit private equity, VC, theoretically even hedge funds. At least for US citizens, there's potential tremendous tax benefits related to carried interest, which has been more hampered lately by regulatory. And if the Dems completely sweep and change some of the tax code, which they would probably like to do to some extent, that could for sure impact some of the 3-year, some of the carried interest, and other provisions. But as of now, it's a powerful vehicle. But in the example I gave, that would mean making it a commercial enterprise. And do you, as a family, potentially want to do that? In the US and other parts of the world, there's a certain value to owning farms, 5-year loss look back, prepaying expenses, depreciation, accrual accounting advantages. And again, these are really, really deep things. You need to work with your own specific tax and legal advisors. I'm just doing this to give you a very broad and very simple educational and hopefully a little bit of entertainment perspective, but you need to do your own diligence. And so many things depend on where you're domiciled, where these are domiciled, and you may be listening to this and the tax laws completely change. This is a very, very complex field. But I have found that some of the wealthiest families in the world love to own farms from an agriculture and community perspective, but also from potentially a tax perspective as well. It could be a very, well, not could be, it is for many, a very, very powerful vehicle. Right now here in the US, a lot of talk of how Donald Trump, a multi-billionaire, pays so little in taxes, but those who are aggressive and out there as big real estate investors, no matter your feelings about the President Trump, kind of understand there's tremendous tax benefits to owning real estate. They're often owned in separate LLCs and entities, often dozens or hundreds of them. Not everyone is going to be successful, every one of them. So you're going to have losses against those that were profitable to those that were not. You're going to have depreciation. That's a huge thing in real estate. In the US, you're going to have the ability of investing through opportunity zones, 1031 exchanges, which may be more hampered depending on who gets in office and how, again, that could be changed. But the opportunity of effectively rolling over profits is very, very, very powerful. Real estate could be, now it's going to be challenged during COVID-19, depending on what kind of real estate it is, and people paying rents, if it's multifamily. I am not saying it's easy. It's a very, very hard business, and probably now harder than ever. But there's tremendous tax opportunities and wealth preservation strategies and techniques baked into or built into real estate, at least for U.S. citizens. But I know the guidelines in many other countries as well. There are strong incentives in many countries for owning real estate. It's just by the American tax code a little extra strong for now here in the U.S. And by the way, if they keep on rolling over, how do they have their wealth to use? A lot of them refinance. Now, that's a strategy if you get over financed and leveraged, that's the better word in real estate, and COVID-19 has really impacted you, that could be a problem. So again, there's advantages, there's disadvantages, but in terms of that moat around the castle and tax and wealth preservation, it's a very, very powerful vehicle. I would recommend, boy, David, I'm giving you and your audience really a lot of my secrets here. Hopefully not giving too much detail. I would recommend for a U.S. citizen and even for others of great wealth around the world to not only have their trust and their assets and resources in their own country, to have diversity, have a foreign asset protection trust. I would look at locations with very strong contract law and that have been maybe difficult for the U.S. or for litigators in the U.S. to breach. I'm thinking the Cook Islands and Nevis being two. There's definitely others. But would I necessarily trust the custody of tens or hundreds of millions or more in those tiny countries? Maybe not. So you could still be a U.S. citizen or a citizen of another country and have an applicable foreign irrevocable trust set up by a highly talented attorney who knows what they're doing, and have the assets custodied in, say, a Switzerland, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., outside of the country where you live. That's a pretty powerful tool. Some people will call that setting up, and you could do this with private placement life insurance as well, setting up a start over fund, as some asset protection attorneys may call it. So there's lots of strategies, and I gave you some pretty advanced ones, admittingly lightly, and admittingly it's going to vary depending on your domicile, your citizenship, and how the rules just are so complicated around the world and change ever so much. David Bain asked, Angelo, is lack of planning and being resourceful on these issues the number one reason why families don't last generation after generation? Well, the key part of what David said, is that the number one reason? And the answer is no. As much as I love to talk about that, that's a reason, but it's not the number one reason. Bad decision making, divorce, intra-family squabble, and litigation. It comes down to governance, how families do governance and how decisions are made. If it's ruled with an iron fist, it's easy, but it doesn't teach collaborative decision making when the elder dies and now the children and grandchildren kind of take over. And that causes major problems. You have to look at it as there's effectively three constituents. You have the elders, as I call them, the rising generation, and the family office executives, perhaps even those around them as close advisors. You really have to look at that more holistically. And from a family perspective, and even a family office perspective, you need to have a strong mission, vision, and value statement. You need to have a constitution. You need to have the structure. It's really not that hard of governance of how decisions are made. And if it's not going to be one person, is it going to be a group, consensus, majority? These are all things that need to be discussed and decided upon and perhaps changed and altered as time goes by. But it's very, very important. You need to always be teaching and engaging, and the buck stops with you as the family, the rising generation. They need to be good stewards. They need to see the value and benefit of the families more powerful when they stay together. And a lot of this comes down to communication, communication, communication. When there's a lack of communication, everything will fall apart. And I'm not saying that communication is the only thing, but when you're an active listener, when you're respectful of the person that's a family member or across from you, and you have a beginner's mindset, you're willing to listen and have maybe a facilitator to help, these are very, very powerful things. And communication goes a long, long way. David Bain asks, what are trends you're seeing with families and their family offices during COVID-19? I'll make this one quick. Enhanced systems, especially policy and procedures, including better remote workflow. Many in the family office noting that, again, like I said earlier, this was an impetus. They should have done this years ago. It's not so hard, but having the right systems, processes, workflow, policy, and procedures is incredibly important. Kind of the rise, it's been forced upon us a bit, a second one, of the virtual family office kind of taking off. It is still an SFO, often doing more with less. The quality of the people, the systems, and technology appears to be even more amplified because of kind of doing more with less. Technology really starts to rise in a level of importance, and the utilization of quality outsourced service providers. On the investing side, more tactical, less passive, meaning less strategic asset allocation, and more tactical, specifically on publicly traded companies, so public equity holdings. We all know there's been a tremendous concentration, at least here in the US, of Apple, Google, Amazon, etc., doing great during COVID. So if you're broadly diversified in 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 public companies, you're going to get a lot of losers in there because it's been very concentrated. So the families have been more tactical and they've done pretty well. Trust me, I know, by being as such. And that pendulum swings. It may go back the other way, but right now it's heavily geared to that. But being someone who always worries about downside risk, I would still take some money off the table and hedge that. Another one, advantages to direct investing. It's been a trend for wealthy, super rich families for a long time, but no fund, having control, having more time, not being reliant on a fund's timeline, often the 2 and 20 structure and the challenges potentially to taxation, more so in actively traded hedge funds, but still. But really important is engaging the next generation. We go back to that again and again in building businesses, getting their hands dirty, understanding the nuances of what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully their youth and their vibrancy bringing some good ideas to much of this as well. So we have found it to be a powerful teaching tool as well for the next generation. My last one on the list, more sophisticated integration of family office structures, onshore and offshore, intertwining, as I said earlier, potentially insurance companies, banks, VC, farms, other entity and structures, and how it all integrates together. It's incredibly complex, but for a family that's gravely concerned about these issues, and again, especially wealth preservation, these are really, really important. We're almost done. David Bain asks, Angelo, tell us more about the work that you do. Well, thank you, David. I want to be very clear and concise on this as well, so I'm going to read it. I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. If you've watched this video, I've said that a million times, so that probably should not be a surprise. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail during times of crisis. My experience with some of the wealthiest families in the world has allowed me to distill best practices for discovering purpose and refining vision, governance, structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family offices need in order to thrive. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality, yet highly adaptive. My process engages all the generations in the family and focuses on designing a generationally dynamic family office of people, systems, technologies that aligns the desires and capabilities of the rising generation and is able to triumph over challenges. I offer my consultative proprietary knowledge and resources incorporating generational collaboration, globally dynamic wealth preservation concepts and structures, onshore and offshore family office entities, and the intertwining of family office structures with family-owned private entities, perhaps including banks, insurers, and, as I mentioned, internally controlled quote-unquote private VC companies. The vast majority of families and their family offices are often blind to both the exponential, nonlinear, accelerated opportunities and hazards, which have the potential to massively disrupt the lives of present and future generations. Often these events have a low probability during a given time frame, but high consequences, like I said earlier, when they take place. I help families and their family offices think through, stress test, what if, exponential opportunities, and such hazards. Unique to other consultative services are the precedents for multi-generational fluidity within the family and their family office is ultimately the only way for a family to become anti-fragile. It's one of the most common words I use that I haven't really used much in this video, and again, courtesy of the great work of Nassim Taleb, who's spoken at my events. I've met him several other times, and truly an amazing thought leader, and I love his work on anti-fragility. Again, to give some context to David's questions, I'm the founder and CEO of Family Office Association. We're a global, now more than ever, membership organization primarily dedicated to the interest of highly successful families and their family offices. I offer a tremendous amount of original proprietary content, of access to me, our Rolodex, our library, and okay, COVID-19 is impacting physical events, but we might have a surprise or two in Miami this winter, intimately and very safely, we'll see. But one of my members put it best: you went from doing 10 events a year to doing 200, practically Monday through Thursday, daily. I host a member privately held video, often peer-to-peer, what families are doing. It's been amazing. And also with tremendous guests, the best in the world, on families creating banks, on families building insurers, their own VC, hiring people, compensation. I'm lucky to have a great Rolodex. I'm naturally very curious. And that's been, some of my members have liked this way better than the old model, and it's way more efficient with less travel. I'm also the host, as I noted, of the Angelo Robles Podcast. You could easily find me on all the major platforms. It used to be called the Effective Family Office Podcast, but I renamed it, and again, you could find it. For my members, they get my master classes, which are often multi-hour pre-recorded deep dives into anti-fragility for family offices 101, compensation, and other issues. If you go to our website, even as not a member, there's ways to pay and download for those. So those are available as one-off as well. And the website is very simply our name, FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. And my email is angelo@FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. And as I noted in what I read when David asked that question, and I wanted to be, again, very clear and concise, I do take on a couple of select consultative assignments through the year from global families. I worked with families on practically all continents. Again, I love what I do. I'm completely ingrained in it, and I'm lucky to have a great Rolodex of relationships, and hopefully I'm always a beginner's mindset and a lifelong learner. I still have so much more to learn, and to me, that's exciting. I'm extremely active on social media. Our YouTube channel is Family Office. I'm very active on LinkedIn, even Instagram. We're Family Office Association. So you could follow us there on any or all of those platforms. I thank you so much, David, for the opportunity of answering your questions. I get a little excited and maybe long-winded, so pardon me, audience, but this has been a lot of fun. David's work is among the best in the community. Him and the whole crew at Family Capital are amazing at what they do and their global perspective, and I'm greatly appreciative, as I'm sure we all are, for the wonderful work that David and his team does. Thank you for asking me these questions. Those of you that listened or watched in, we hope you got some value from it, and feel free to reach out to me. Again, everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Thank you so much.